The train whistle cut through the frozen January air like a blade, and Grace Larson pressed her gloved hand against the frosted window, her breath catching at the vast emptiness of the Arizona territory stretching before her. She had not told Benjamin Mitchell about her 3 younger sisters tucked in the seats behind her, bundled in their threadbare coats and holding hands against their shared fear of the unknown. The advertisement in the Boston newspaper had said he wanted a mail-order bride, not an instant family, but Grace had no choice. After their parents died in the tenement fire 6 months ago, keeping her sisters together had become more important than breathing. "Grace, I am scared," whispered 16-year-old Margaret, her freckled face pale beneath her bonnet. "What if he sends us back?" "He will not," Grace said with more confidence than she felt. At 23, she had become mother and father both to Margaret, 18-year-old Harriet, and 19-year-old Sophie. "I will make certain of it." The train lurched as it began slowing, and Grace smoothed down her best dress, the green wool one she had mended so many times the original stitching barely showed. Through the window, she could see Gila City taking shape through the swirling snow. It was smaller than she had imagined, just a collection of wooden buildings huddled together against the winter cold, so different from the crowded streets of Boston. "Ladies, we are approaching Gila City," the conductor called, making his way through the car. "Final stop before Tucson." Grace stood, her legs unsteady from 3 days of travel. "Come, all of you, stay close." They gathered their few belongings, 2 battered carpetbags holding everything they owned in the world. Sophie helped Margaret with her coat while Harriet, always the practical one, checked that they had not forgotten anything under the seats. The platform was nearly empty when they stepped down, just a few rough-looking men loading freight and a woman in a heavy shawl hurrying toward the general store. The wind hit Grace like a fist, colder than anything Boston had offered, and she instinctively pulled her sisters closer. "You Grace Larson?" a deep voice asked, and Grace turned to find herself looking up at the tallest man she had ever seen. Benjamin Mitchell stood well over 6 feet, broad-shouldered in a sheepskin coat, with dark hair curling beneath his hat and eyes the color of strong coffee. His face was weathered from sun and wind, but he could not have been more than 27 or 28, and despite her terror, Grace felt her stomach flip in a way that had nothing to do with fear. "I am," she said, lifting her chin. "And I have something to tell you right away, before another moment passes." Benjamin's eyes had already found her sisters, standing in a nervous cluster behind her. His expression was unreadable as he looked from one young woman to the next, taking in their worn clothes and frightened faces. "These are my sisters," Grace said quickly. "Margaret, Harriet, and Sophie. Our parents died, and I am all they have. I should have told you in my letters, and I know it was dishonest not to, but I could not leave them in Boston. If you want to send me back on the next train, I will understand, but please, I am begging you, let them stay. They can work, they can earn their keep, they will not be any trouble." The words tumbled out faster and faster, and she hated how desperate she sounded, but desperation was all she had left. Behind her, she could hear Sophie's quiet crying and feel Harriet's hand gripping her arm. Benjamin stood silent for a long moment, his face still showing nothing. Then he looked past Grace to her sisters and back again, and something shifted in his expression. "My ranch just got the family I never thought I would have," he said simply. "Welcome to Arizona territory." Grace felt her knees go weak with relief. "You mean it, truly." "I grew up in an orphanage in Kansas," Benjamin said, picking up their bags as if they weighed nothing. "Had nobody to call my own until I worked and saved enough to buy my piece of land. I asked for a wife because this ranch was feeling too empty, but a whole family." He shook his head, and for the first time, Grace saw him smile. "That is more than I prayed for." Margaret stopped crying, and Sophie actually laughed, a sound of pure relief. Harriet still looked skeptical, but some of the tension left her shoulders. "My wagon is just over here," Benjamin said, leading them toward a sturdy-looking rig hitched to two patient horses. "It is about an hour ride to the ranch. I brought extra blankets because I figured you East Coast folks would not be ready for a desert winter." "The desert gets cold?" Margaret asked, surprised. "Gets down below freezing plenty of nights," Benjamin said, helping her up into the wagon bed where he had indeed piled thick woolen blankets. "Not like your Boston winters, I imagine, but cold enough." He helped each sister into the wagon with the same gentle courtesy, and when he offered Grace his hand to help her onto the seat beside him, she felt calluses on his palm and a strength that seemed unshakable. Their eyes met for just a moment, and Grace felt that flip in her stomach again. The ranch road took them through country Grace had only seen in drawings. Saguaro cactus stood like sentinels against the gray sky, and rocky hills rose in the distance, their tops dusted with snow. The landscape was harsh and beautiful and completely foreign. "How long have you had the ranch?" Grace asked, painfully aware of how close Benjamin sat beside her, his shoulder occasionally brushing hers as the wagon rocked. 5 years, he said. "Saved every penny working cattle drives and railroad construction. Bought 200 acres and built the house myself. Got a good herd going now, about 100 head of cattle, and I am making enough to live on and then some." "Is it very isolated?" Harriet asked from the back. "Nearest neighbor is about 3 miles east, the Patterson family," Benjamin said. "Good people. Town is 8 miles, close enough for church on Sundays and supplies when we need them. It is not crowded, but you are not alone out here either." Sophie leaned forward. "Is there a school?" "Little schoolhouse in town. Teacher is Mrs. Henderson. She is strict but fair." He glanced back at Sophie. "You planning to teach or learn?" "I am 19, Sophie said indignantly. "I finished school 2 years ago, but I liked it. I thought maybe I could help Mrs. Henderson sometimes." "She would probably appreciate that," Benjamin said. "She has about 20 students ranging from 6 to 14. The conversation continued easily, and Grace marveled at how comfortable Benjamin seemed with her deception. She had expected anger, or at least annoyance, but he asked her sisters questions about their interests and skills as if he genuinely wanted to know them. "There it is," he said finally, pointing ahead. The ranch house sat in a shallow valley, protected from the worst of the wind by rocky outcroppings. It was larger than Grace had expected, a solid timber structure with a covered porch and real glass windows. A barn stood nearby, along with a chicken coop and several smaller outbuildings. "It is beautiful," Grace breathed. "It is home," Benjamin said quietly. "Our home now." He pulled the wagon up to the house and helped everyone down. The front door was unlocked, and he pushed it open to reveal a large main room with a stone fireplace already laid with wood ready to light. "I have 3 bedrooms," Benjamin explained, striking a match to get the fire going. "I figured you and I would take the main one, but with your sisters here, maybe it makes more sense for you ladies to share the 2 larger rooms and I can take the small one until." He trailed off, color rising in his weathered cheeks. "That would be appropriate," Grace said quickly, grateful for his thoughtfulness. "Until we know each other better. There is a good well just outside, and I have an indoor pump in the kitchen, which is through there," he continued, pointing to a doorway. "Privy is out back, but I am planning to build a bathing room onto the house come spring." Margaret was already exploring, her natural curiosity overcoming her shyness. "You have books, whole shelf of them," Benjamin said. "I like to read in the evenings. You are welcome to any of them." Grace watched her youngest sister run her fingers reverently along the spines of the books and felt tears prick her eyes. In Boston, they had been so poor that books were an impossible luxury. "Let me show you around the rest. Then I will get supper started," Benjamin said. "You must all be hungry." The house was simple but well made, with sturdy furniture that Benjamin had clearly built himself. The kitchen had a good iron stove, a large table, and cabinets stocked with basic supplies. The bedrooms were small, but each had a real bed frame and mattress, not just straw ticking on the floor. "I am sorry it is not fancy," Benjamin said, watching Grace take it all in. "It is wonderful," Grace said honestly. "It is more than we have had in a long time." He nodded, seeming satisfied. "I will start dinner. You ladies get settled." But Grace followed him to the kitchen instead, leaving her sisters to explore. "You should not have to cook after traveling to town. Let me help." "You have been on a train for 3 days," Benjamin pointed out. "And you are being far kinder than you need to be after I lied to you," Grace countered. "Please, let me help. I am a good cook." He studied her for a moment, then nodded. "All right. There is venison in the cold box and vegetables in the bin. I make a decent stew." They worked together in comfortable silence, and Grace found herself sneaking glances at him. He moved with efficiency in the kitchen, clearly used to taking care of himself. His hands were scarred from hard work, but they were gentle when he handed her a knife for chopping. "Why did you really want a mail-order bride?" Grace asked quietly. "A man like you could surely find a wife locally." Benjamin was quiet for a long moment, adding meat to the hot pot. "The women in town are either already married or are the daughters of established families who want more than a ranch hand made good. And I did not want to marry someone who saw me as just a step up. I wanted someone who would choose me and this life, knowing what she was getting into." He glanced at her. "Though I suppose you did not know you were getting quite this much." Grace felt her cheeks heat. "I chose you from all the advertisements I read. Your letter was kind, and you wrote about wanting a partner, not just a housekeeper or a decoration. That mattered to me." "Why did you answer an advertisement at all?" he asked. "Pretty woman like you must have had options in Boston." "Not good ones," Grace said. "After our parents died, we lost our housing. I was working at a textile mill, but the wages were barely enough to feed us, and the boarding houses would not take all 4 of us. Men made offers, but not respectable ones." She met his eyes. "You offered respect and honesty. That was worth more than anything." "I meant what I said in my letters," Benjamin said. "I want a real marriage, a partnership, but I understand if you need time, especially with your sisters here. We can take things slow." "That would be kind," Grace said softly, relief washing through her. "I want to know you first." "Fair enough," he agreed. "We have got time." Supper was ready within the hour, and the 4 sisters and Benjamin crowded around the kitchen table. The stew was hearty and delicious, and for the first time in months, Grace saw her sisters eat until they were full. "This is the best meal I have had in forever," Sophie declared. "Grace made half of it," Benjamin said. "She is a fine cook." Margaret yawned hugely, and Harriet was not far behind. The journey had exhausted all of them. "Why don't you ladies get some rest?" Benjamin suggested. "I will clean up here." "We should help," Harriet protested, but Grace could see her swaying with tiredness. "Tomorrow," Grace said firmly. "Tonight we all need sleep." She got her sisters settled in the 2 bedrooms, Margaret and Sophie sharing one, Harriet taking the other. They had only the clothes they wore and one change each, but Benjamin had left thick quilts on each bed, and the rooms were warm from the fire in the main room. "Grace," Margaret whispered as Grace tucked the quilt around her. "Is he really going to let us stay?" "He really is," Grace assured her. "Try not to worry anymore. We are safe now." When her sisters were finally asleep, Grace returned to the main room to find Benjamin banking the fire for the night. "They are settled?" he asked. "Yes, thank you," Grace said. "Benjamin, I cannot express how grateful I am for your kindness today. Most men would have sent us straight back to Boston." He straightened, brushing ash from his hands. "I meant what I said before. Family is not something I take lightly. Your sisters are welcome here for as long as they need." "And us?" Grace asked, her heart pounding. "You still want to marry me after I deceived you?" Benjamin crossed the room until he stood close enough that Grace had to tilt her head back to meet his eyes. "I want to marry you," he said quietly, "but I want you to be sure. We can wait until you feel comfortable, until you know me well enough to be certain. There is no rush." Grace felt something warm unfurl in her chest. "Could we perhaps spend time together, get to know each other properly?" "I would like that," Benjamin said, and his smile transformed his serious face into something almost boyish. "I would like that very much." The next morning dawned clear and cold, and Grace woke to find sunlight streaming through the window of the small room Benjamin had given her. She could hear voices in the kitchen and the smell of coffee brewing. She dressed quickly in her other dress, a faded blue calico, and followed the sounds to find Benjamin teaching Margaret how to make flapjacks, while Sophie set the table and Harriet pumped fresh water. "Good morning," Benjamin said when he saw her. "Your sisters insisted on helping with breakfast." "We wanted to earn our keep," Harriet said firmly. "You are family, not hired hands," Benjamin said, flipping a flapjack with practiced ease. "But I appreciate the help all the same." Breakfast was lively and cheerful, so different from the grim, silent meals they had choked down in Boston. Benjamin told stories about Arizona Territory, about the strange animals and plants, the fierce summer heat and winter cold, the characters who lived in Gila City. "There is a dance in town Saturday night," he mentioned. "Social at the church. If you ladies are up for it, we could all go. Good way to meet folks." Grace saw the excitement on her sisters' faces and felt torn. "We do not have proper dresses for a dance." "Neither does half the town," Benjamin assured her. "It is not a fancy affair, just neighbors gathering to play music and visit." "Could we really go?" Sophie asked hopefully. "If Grace says yes," Benjamin said, looking at her. Grace thought about it. Meeting the community would be important, and her sisters deserved some fun after everything they had endured. "Yes, let us go." The week passed in a flurry of activity. Benjamin showed them around the ranch, teaching them how to gather eggs from the chickens, how to pump water efficiently, where everything was stored. He was patient with their mistakes and generous with his praise when they did well. Grace found herself drawn to him more each day. He was kind without being soft, strong without being harsh. He treated her sisters with the same respect he showed her, never making them feel like burdens. And when their eyes met across the dinner table, or while working side by side in the kitchen, Grace felt a flutter of something she had never experienced before. Saturday arrived with another clear, cold day. The sisters spent the afternoon helping each other look their best with their limited wardrobes. Grace wore her green wool dress again, mended and pressed, and helped pin up Margaret's hair to make her look older. Benjamin had cleaned up as well, wearing a white shirt and string tie with his good trousers. He had shaved and combed his hair, and Grace felt her breath catch at how handsome he looked. The ride to town was festive, with all four sisters bundled in the wagon bed, laughing and talking. Benjamin had heated bricks wrapped in cloth for their feet, and the cold air nipped at their cheeks but could not dampen their spirits. The church was lit up warm and welcoming when they arrived, and music already spilled out into the night. Inside, a fiddle player was tuning up while people milled about, talking and laughing. "Benjamin," a weathered man called out. "Heard you got yourself a bride on the train this week." "I did indeed," Benjamin said, putting a protective hand on Grace's lower back. Grace Larson, soon to be Grace Mitchell, and her sisters Margaret, Sophie, and Harriet. People crowded around to introduce themselves. Mrs. Patterson, the neighbor Benjamin had mentioned, welcomed them warmly. The schoolteacher, Mrs. Henderson, immediately took to Sophie, discussing teaching methods. A young cowboy named Tom Crawford could not take his eyes off Harriet, much to her flustered delight. The music started properly, and Benjamin turned to Grace. "May I have this dance?" "I am not very practiced," Grace admitted. "Neither am I," he said with a grin. "We will figure it out together." He took her hand and led her into the simple square dance, and Grace found herself laughing as they stumbled through the steps. Benjamin was terrible at dancing, stepping on her toes twice and going the wrong direction once, but he laughed at himself so easily that Grace could not help but join in. "I am sorry," he said, breathless from laughing and dancing. "I warned you I was not good at this." "I am having the most wonderful time," Grace said honestly, and realized it was true. When was the last time she had laughed like this? They danced 3 more dances, each one a little less clumsy, before Benjamin led her outside to cool off. The night air was crisp and clean, and stars blazed overhead in a way they never had in Boston's smoky skies. "Grace," Benjamin said, his voice suddenly serious, "I need to ask you something." Her heart jumped. "Yes. You have been here a week now." "I know it is fast, but I am not getting any younger, and I meant what I said in my letters. I want a real marriage, a partnership." He took her hand gently. "I am falling for you, Grace. I think I started the moment you stepped off that train looking so scared and brave all at once. Will you marry me properly? Not just as an arrangement, but as a real choice." Grace looked up at him, at his honest eyes and hopeful expression, and felt the last of her walls crumble. "I am falling for you too," she whispered. "It terrifies me how fast it is happening, but yes. Yes, I will marry you." Benjamin let out a whoop of joy that startled her into laughter, then picked her up and spun her around right there on the church steps. When he set her down, they were both breathless and grinning. "When?" he asked. "Soon," Grace said. "I do not want to wait long." "Next Saturday," he suggested. "The preacher could do it after the Sunday service, and we could have a small celebration at the ranch." "Perfect," Grace agreed, and when Benjamin leaned down to kiss her, she met him halfway. The kiss was gentle and sweet, and it sent warmth flooding through Grace's entire body. When they pulled apart, Benjamin rested his forehead against hers. "You have made me the happiest man in Arizona territory," he murmured. "You saved my life," Grace said. "All our lives. I will spend forever being grateful." "Don't marry me out of gratitude," Benjamin said quickly, pulling back to look at her. "I am not," Grace assured him. "I am marrying you because when I look at you, I see the man I want to spend my life with. I see kindness and strength and integrity. I see home." Benjamin kissed her again, deeper this time, and Grace felt herself melting into him. They might have stayed there all night if Margaret had not burst through the door looking for them. "Grace." Sophie is dancing with the schoolteacher's son, and Harriet has been asked to dance by 3 different men. They laughed and went back inside to find the dance in full swing. Grace watched her sisters whirling through the patterns, their faces alight with joy, and felt peace settle over her. They were safe. They were home. They were going to be all right. The week before the wedding flew by in a blur of preparation. Mrs. Patterson and the other ranch wives came to visit, bringing wedding gifts and advice. They helped Grace let out a white Sunday dress that had belonged to Mrs. Patterson's daughter to serve as a wedding gown, and they shared recipes and household tips. Benjamin worked from dawn to dusk, making repairs to the house and preparing for winter. He moved his things into the small bedroom without complaint, giving Grace privacy. But Grace found herself seeking him out more and more, finding excuses to be near him. One evening, as they sat by the fire after her sisters had gone to bed, Grace worked on mending while Benjamin read aloud from one of his books. It was peaceful and domestic, and Grace could easily imagine 50 more years of evenings just like this. "Benjamin," she said softly. He looked up from his book. "Yes, I am not scared anymore," she said. "About the wedding, I mean, about us." He set the book aside and moved to sit beside her on the settee. "I am glad. I want you to be happy, Grace." "I am happy," she said. "Happier than I have been in years. You did that." "We did that," he corrected, taking her hand. "You were brave enough to come all this way. You trusted me." "I am glad I did," Grace said, leaning against his shoulder. He wrapped his arm around her, and they sat that way until the fire burned low. The wedding day arrived bright and clear, unseasonably warm for late January. Grace dressed in the altered white dress, and her sisters wove winter wildflowers into her hair. She looked in the mirror and barely recognized herself. Her cheeks had filled out from regular meals, and her eyes were bright with happiness instead of shadowed with worry. "You look beautiful," Harriet said, tears in her eyes. "He is a good man," Sophie added. "We approve." "He better be good to you," Margaret said fiercely, "or he will have to answer to us." Grace laughed and hugged all three of them. "I love you all so much. Thank you for being here with me." The ceremony was held in the little church, packed with neighbors and townsfolk who had come to witness the marriage. Benjamin stood at the altar in his best suit, his hair slicked back, looking nervous and hopeful. When Grace walked down the aisle on Tom Crawford's offered arm, since they had no father to give her away, Benjamin's face transformed with such joy that Grace felt tears spring to her eyes. The preacher kept the ceremony short and sweet. They exchanged simple gold bands that Benjamin had ordered from the jeweler in Tucson. When the preacher pronounced them husband and wife and told Benjamin he could kiss his bride, the kiss was chaste and proper for church, but it promised more for later. The celebration back at the ranch was lively and warm. Neighbors brought food and drink, the fiddle player came to provide music, and people danced in the main room that Grace and her sisters had cleaned and decorated with pine boughs and winter berries. Grace danced with Benjamin, with Tom Crawford, who was courting Harriet, with old Mr. Patterson, with half the men in the county. But her eyes kept finding Benjamin across the room, and every time they met, she felt a thrill run through her. Finally, as the sun set and the party began to wind down, Benjamin caught her hand. "Ready to send them all home?" he whispered. "Yes," Grace breathed. They thanked everyone for coming, accepted final congratulations and well wishes, and saw the last guest off. Her sisters had cleaned up most of the mess, then tactfully retired to their rooms early, leaving the newlyweds alone. Benjamin banked the fire while Grace changed out of her wedding dress into her nightgown and wrapper in what was now their bedroom. Her hands shook with nervousness as she brushed out her hair. A soft knock on the door made her jump. "Grace, can I come in?" "Yes," she said, her voice barely audible. Benjamin entered, and Grace saw that he too had changed, wearing just his trousers and a clean shirt with the collar open. He looked younger and more uncertain than she had ever seen him. "Are you afraid?" he asked gently. "A little," Grace admitted, "but not of you, just of the unknown." He crossed to her and took her hands. "We go at your pace. If you need me to stop or slow down, you tell me. This is supposed to be good for both of us." Grace felt some of her tension ease. "I trust you." "That is the greatest gift you could give me," Benjamin said, and kissed her softly. The kiss deepened gradually, and Benjamin's hands came up to cradle her face with infinite gentleness. Grace let herself sink into the sensation, into the warmth and rightness of being in his arms. What followed was tender and careful, with Benjamin constantly checking that she was all right, that she wanted to continue. There was some pain, but there was also pleasure and closeness and the overwhelming feeling of being cherished. When it was over, they lay tangled together in the big bed, and Grace rested her head on Benjamin's chest, listening to his heartbeat slow. "I love you," she whispered into the darkness. She felt Benjamin's intake of breath, felt his arms tighten around her. "I love you too," he said, his voice rough with emotion. "More than I thought possible." Grace fell asleep feeling safe and loved, with her husband's steady breathing lulling her into dreams of their future together. The first months of marriage were an adjustment. Grace learned the rhythms of ranch life, the endless cycle of chores and seasonal work. Benjamin taught her to ride a horse, though she was nervous at first, and she taught him to make her mother's biscuit recipe that made him groan with pleasure. Her sisters settled into their new lives as well. Sophie began helping at the school 2 days a week and started courting the schoolteacher's son, a serious young man named Daniel who worked at the general store. Harriet and Tom Crawford were keeping company properly, with him calling on Sunday afternoons. Even Margaret seemed happier, making friends with the Patterson daughter who was her age. Spring came to the Arizona desert in an explosion of wildflowers and baby animals. The cattle had calved successfully, and Benjamin was pleased with the increase to his herd. He and Grace worked side by side, branding calves and mending fences, and Grace found she loved the physical work and the sense of accomplishment. One evening in early April, Grace realized her monthly courses were late. She waited another week before allowing herself to hope, then another week to be sure. When she was certain, she told Benjamin as they lay in bed together. "I think I am with child," she whispered. Benjamin went very still, then let out a whoop and pulled her into his arms. "Truly, I am almost certain," Grace said, laughing at his enthusiasm. "We will have to wait to be completely sure, but yes, I think so." "A baby," Benjamin said wonderingly. "Our baby." He laid his hand gently on her still flat stomach. "You have given me everything I never knew I wanted, Grace Mitchell." "We gave each other that," Grace said, covering his hand with hers. The pregnancy progressed smoothly through the hot summer months. Grace felt well, if a bit tired, and Benjamin was absurdly protective, trying to prevent her from doing any heavy work. Her sisters were thrilled at the prospect of becoming aunts. In July, Sophie married Daniel in the same little church where Grace and Benjamin had wed. It was a joyful occasion, and Grace cried happy tears as she watched her sister pledge her life to the kind young man who clearly adored her. Tom Crawford proposed to Harriet in August, and they planned a December wedding. Margaret was growing up fast, turning 17 and attracting the attention of several young men in town, though she seemed in no hurry to settle on any of them. As Grace's belly swelled with their coming child, Benjamin became even more devoted. He rubbed her feet when they ached, brought her cold water when she was hot, and talked to the baby every night, his hand resting on her stomach. "You think it is a boy or a girl?" he asked one night in late October. "I do not know," Grace said. "Either way, I hope they have your kind heart." "And your courage," Benjamin said, kissing her rounded belly. "You are the bravest person I know." The baby came in early November, a long labor that had Benjamin pacing and praying. Mrs. Patterson attended as midwife, with Sophie and Harriet helping. When the baby finally arrived, letting out a lusty cry, Mrs. Patterson announced, "It is a boy, a fine, healthy boy." Benjamin was allowed in to meet his son, and Grace watched tears stream down his face as he held the tiny bundle. "He is perfect," Benjamin whispered. "Absolutely perfect." They named him Robert Benjamin Mitchell, after Benjamin's father who had died when Benjamin was young. Little Robert had dark hair like his father and lungs that worked very well indeed. The first months of parenthood were exhausting but joyful. Benjamin proved to be a devoted father, walking the floor with Robert at night and changing nappies without complaint. Grace nursed the baby and marveled at the life they had created. Harriet's December wedding to Tom was beautiful, and Grace stood as matron of honor with baby Robert sleeping in her arms. The newlyweds moved into Tom's small house in town, where he had started a freighting business that was doing well. As 1879 turned to 1880, Grace looked around at the life she had built and felt overwhelmed with gratitude. Her sisters were all thriving, married or on their way to good futures. Her son was healthy and growing, and Benjamin was everything she had ever dreamed a husband could be. One evening, as they sat together watching the sunset paint the desert sky in shades of orange and purple, Robert asleep between them, Benjamin took her hand. "You ever miss Boston?" he asked. Grace thought about it honestly. "I miss nothing about the life we had there. But I would not trade any of it because it brought me here to you. I wake up some mornings and have to remind myself this is real," Benjamin admitted. "That you are real, that Robert is real, that I have this family." "It is real," Grace assured him, "and it is ours." They sat in comfortable silence, and Grace reflected on the past year and a half. She had stepped off a train in the frozen January desert, terrified and desperate, lying about her 3 sisters and praying for mercy. Benjamin had looked at her ragged little family and said his ranch just got the family he never thought he would have. He had kept that promise every single day since. Margaret came running up from the barn where she had been feeding the chickens. At 17, she had grown into a lovely young woman, and Grace suspected an announcement about the Patterson boy was coming soon. "Grace, Benjamin, come quick. The Pattersons are here and they brought news from town." They gathered up baby Robert and went to greet their neighbors, who had indeed brought news. The railroad was expanding, bringing more settlers to the territory. Gila City was growing. The future looked bright. As Grace stood on her porch, her husband's arm around her waist, her son in her arms, her sisters healthy and happy, she thought about the risk she had taken answering that advertisement. She had been so afraid, and so desperate, and so hopeful all at once. Benjamin had given her and her sisters a home, but more than that, he had given them love. He had chosen them, all of them, without hesitation. And in return, Grace had given him her whole heart. The years continued to pass in a rhythm of seasons and celebrations. In 1881, Grace gave birth to twin daughters, Alice and Caroline, who had Benjamin wrapped around their tiny fingers from the moment they arrived. He built additions onto the house to accommodate the growing family, adding a proper bathing room just as he had promised, and extra bedrooms. Margaret married the Patterson boy, James, in the spring of 1882, in a wedding that brought together half the county. She moved to the Patterson ranch but visited often with her new husband, who Benjamin took on as a partner in expanding the cattle operation. Sophie had her first child in 1883, a daughter named Grace in honor of her sister. Harriet followed with a son a few months later. The sisters gathered often with their children, watching the cousins play together and marveling at how far they had come from the frightened girls on that winter train. Benjamin's ranch prospered. He added more land, more cattle, and hired hands to help with the work. But he never lost his gentle nature or his devotion to his family. Every evening, no matter how busy the day had been, he made time to sit with Grace and talk about everything and nothing. Robert grew into a serious, thoughtful boy who loved horses and reading in equal measure. The twins were wild and adventurous, constantly getting into mischief that had Benjamin laughing even as he tried to scold them. In 1885, Grace gave birth to another son, William, and Benjamin declared their family complete. 5 children, 3 sisters, all settled and happy, a prosperous ranch, and a marriage built on love and respect. It was more than either of them had dreamed possible. One winter evening, almost exactly 7 years after Grace had stepped off that train, they sat together by the fire. The children were asleep, the house was quiet, and snow fell softly outside the windows. "You remember what you said that first day?" Grace asked, nestled against Benjamin's shoulder. "When I told you about my sisters. I said my ranch just got the family I never thought I would have," Benjamin recalled. "You saved us," Grace said softly. "No," Benjamin corrected, tilting her face up to his. "We saved each other. I was so lonely before you came, Grace. I had land and cattle and a house, but I did not have a home. You gave me that. You and your sisters and our children, you made this a home." "I love you," Grace said, the words as true now as the first time she had said them. "I love you too," Benjamin replied, and kissed her with all the tenderness and passion of 7 years of marriage. Always and forever. Outside, the desert winter worked its quiet magic, transforming the harsh landscape into something beautiful and strange. Inside, the Mitchell family slept safe and warm, bound together by love that had started with a leap of faith and grown into something unshakable. Grace had brought her 3 sisters on that winter train, desperate and afraid. Benjamin had looked at them and seen possibility, seen family, seen hope. Together, they had built a life that exceeded anything either of them could have imagined. The ranch that had been too empty for one lonely cowboy now rang with the laughter of children, the chatter of sisters visiting, the sounds of a full and vibrant life. The mail-order bride who had lied out of love for her sisters had become the center of a family that spread across the county, touching lives and building futures. As Grace drifted off to sleep in her husband's arms, she thought about the girl she had been, stepping off that train with her heart in her throat and her sister's hands in hers. She wished she could tell that frightened girl that everything would be all right, that the tall cowboy waiting on the platform would be the answer to prayers she had not even known how to pray. But perhaps that girl had known, deep down. Perhaps that was why she had answered Benjamin's advertisement out of all the ones she had read. Perhaps somewhere in her desperate, frightened heart, she had recognized something in his simple, honest letter, something that promised safety and home and love. The snow continued to fall, blanketing the Arizona desert in white, and in the morning there would be chores and children and the endless work of ranch life. But for now, there was just peace and warmth and the steady breathing of the man Grace loved more with each passing year. Benjamin's ranch had gotten the family he never thought he would have, and Grace had found the home she never thought existed. Together, they had built something lasting, something true, something beautiful. And it all started with a leap of faith on a winter train, 3 frightened sisters, and a cowboy who knew that family was not about blood alone, but about choice and commitment and love freely given. Their story was not one of dramatic adventures or thrilling rescues, though there had been moments of both over the years. It was a story of quiet devotion, of daily choices to love and support each other, of building a life together one day at a time. It was a story of hope fulfilled and prayers answered. It was a story of the American West, where people came to start over and found families of choice as strong as any bond of blood. Most of all, it was a love story. Not the kind that burned hot and fast, but the kind that built slowly and lasted forever. The kind that weathered storms and celebrated joys that grew deeper with time instead of fading. As the fire burned low and the house settled into sleep, Grace Mitchell smiled and held tighter to her husband. Her sisters were safe and happy. Her children were healthy and loved. Her life was full and rich and more than she had ever dreamed possible. And it had all started with a cowboy who looked at four desperate sisters and said the words that changed everything. "My ranch just got the family I never thought I would have." Those words had been a promise, and Benjamin Mitchell had kept that promise every single day since. He had made them family, not just in name but in truth. And in return, Grace and her sisters had given him the same gift, transforming a lonely ranch into a home filled with love and laughter. The desert winter night wrapped around the house like a blessing, and inside, the Mitchell family slept on, secure in the knowledge that they belonged to each other, now and always. Their future stretched out bright and promising, full of more children and grandchildren to come, more seasons on the ranch, more years of the quiet, steady love that was the foundation of everything. Grace had taken the biggest risk of her life stepping onto that train with her sisters. Benjamin had taken his own risk, accepting a mail-order bride sight unseen. Both of them had been looking for something, though neither had quite known what. What they found was each other, and in finding each other they found home. Not just a place, but a feeling, a certainty that they were exactly where they belonged. And so the story that began with fear and desperation ended in joy and fulfillment, with a family bound by love and a future bright with promise. The mail-order bride and the lonely cowboy had built something that would last for generations. A legacy of love that started with three sisters on a winter train, and a man brave enough to say yes to the unexpected family that appeared on his doorstep. It was a simple story in many ways, but it was theirs, and it was perfect. And as the years continued to unfold, through good times and hard times, through births and deaths and all the moments in between, that foundation of love remained unshaken. Grace and Benjamin grew old together. Their children grew and had children of their own, and the ranch that had once been too empty for one man became the gathering place for a family that numbered in the dozens. Every Thanksgiving and Christmas, the house overflowed with people, with laughter, with the chaos and joy of family. And every year, on the anniversary of the day Grace stepped off that train, Benjamin would take her hand and repeat those words. "My ranch just got the family I never thought I would have." And every year, Grace would smile and kiss him and say, "And I got the home I never thought I would find." It was their tradition, their reminder of where they had started and how far they had come. It was a celebration of the risk they had both taken and the reward that risk had brought. As they grew older, their love only deepened. Benjamin's hair turned silver, and Grace developed laugh lines around her eyes from years of smiling. Their children became adults, strong and capable, carrying forward the values of hard work and devotion that their parents had modeled. Robert took over the ranch eventually, running it with the same integrity his father had shown. The twins married good men and had families of their own. William became a teacher, inspired by his Aunt Sophie's love of education. Sophie and Daniel's children played with Harriet and Tom's children, and Margaret and James's children. The next generation of the family grew up knowing they were part of something special, part of a story that started with courage and love. And through it all, at the center of everything, were Grace and Benjamin, the mail-order bride who had brought three sisters on a winter train, the cowboy who had said yes to an instant family. They had built this together, this beautiful, messy, wonderful life. They had taken loneliness and desperation and transformed it into joy and belonging. They had proven that family is not always about blood, but about choice and commitment and love that endures. As they sat on their porch in their later years, watching their grandchildren play in the yard, Grace would sometimes think about that frightened girl on the train. She would remember the terror of lying to Benjamin about her sisters, the desperate hope that he would not turn them away. And she would marvel at the grace that had brought her to this moment, to this life, to this love. Benjamin would catch her looking thoughtful and would ask what she was thinking about. And she would tell him the same thing every time. How lucky I am. How blessed we are. And he would agree, and they would sit in comfortable silence, hands clasped, watching the life they had built unfold before them. The story of Grace and Benjamin Mitchell became legendary in Gila City. People told it to their children, the tale of the mail-order bride who brought her sisters and the cowboy who welcomed them all. It became a symbol of what the West could be at its best, a place where people took care of each other, where family was about love rather than blood, where second chances were possible. But for Grace and Benjamin, it was not a legend. It was their life, their truth, their daily reality. And they lived it with gratitude and joy, cherishing each day they had together. When Benjamin finally passed away at the age of 78, surrounded by his children and grandchildren, his last words were to Grace. "Thank you," he whispered, "for stepping off that train, for choosing me. For this life." Grace held his hand and kissed his forehead. "Thank you for seeing us, for welcoming us, for loving us. You were the answer to prayers I did not know how to pray." He smiled, squeezed her hand one last time, and slipped away peacefully. Grace grieved him deeply but not bitterly. They had been given 48 years together, which was more than many received. They had built a family, a legacy, a love that would endure long after they were gone. She lived another 5 years, surrounded by her children and grandchildren and the sisters who were still her closest friends. Sophie and Harriet were still alive, and Margaret as well, and they spent hours together reminiscing about that winter train ride that had changed all their lives. When Grace's time came, she went peacefully in her sleep, and her family laid her to rest beside Benjamin on a hill overlooking the ranch. The stone marker read Grace Larson Mitchell, beloved wife, mother, and sister, 1856–1927. But her true legacy was not the stone. It was the thriving family she left behind, the children and grandchildren and great-grandchildren who carried forward her courage and her love. It was the story that lived on, told and retold, of how one woman's desperate gamble led to a love that lasted a lifetime. The ranch continued on, run by Robert and then by his son, Benjamin Roman II. The house was expanded again and again, but the original structure remained, a testament to the man who had built it with his own hands for the family he hoped to find. And on the mantel in the main room, carefully preserved, sat the advertisement that had started it all. The newspaper clipping was yellowed and fragile now, but the words were still legible. "Rancher seeks mail-order bride. Must be hardworking, honest, and ready for frontier life. Will provide comfortable home and respectful partnership." Below it, in a frame, was the letter Grace had written in response, confessing about her sisters and begging for mercy. And below that, Benjamin's reply, "Bring them all. My ranch just got the family I never thought I would have." Those artifacts became family treasures, passed down through the generations, a reminder of where they all came from. A reminder that love could be found in unexpected places, that family could be chosen as well as born, that courage and kindness could transform lives. The story of Grace and Benjamin Mitchell lived on, not as a fairy tale but as a truth, a testament to the power of taking chances and opening your heart. It reminded people that sometimes the greatest love stories are not about passion and drama, but about quiet devotion and daily choices to love and support each other. Their legacy was written not just in the lives of their descendants, but in the very fabric of the community they helped build. Gila City grew and changed over the years, but the values they represented remained constant: hospitality, hard work, family, and love. And so the story that began with three sisters on a winter train and a cowboy who said yes to the unexpected came full circle. It was a story of the American West, of courage and determination, of building something from nothing. But most of all, it was a love story. A true love story. The kind that lasts forever, not because it is perfect, but because it is real. Because two people chose each other, day after day, year after year, through good times and hard times, through joy and sorrow, through all the moments that make up a life. Grace and Benjamin Mitchell found each other against all odds, built a family from fragments, and created a love that endured long after they were gone. Their story proved that sometimes the greatest adventures are not about going somewhere new, but about finding where you belong. And they belonged together, always and forever, from that first moment on the train platform to their final resting place on the hill. They belonged to each other, and to the family they created, and to the legacy they left behind. It was a simple story, really. Just a mail-order bride, a cowboy, three sisters, and the family they became. But in its simplicity was profound truth. That love is always worth the risk, that family is worth fighting for, and that sometimes the best things in life come from the chances we are brave enough to take. The end.